Yeah. So I'm going to share the screen. I don't know what is happening here. Okay. So, Global Network for Aging Research on China, or Chinese, is the first international research network on the aging issues of Chinese populations that brings together researchers, policymakers, and NGOs with a particular focus on China, of course. At the GNARC, we support collaborative research with older people, the research community, and key stakeholders. And also we try to support early career researchers of on aging, especially from the Global South. And now GNARC is a growing community with over 200 members from all over the world. And at this stage, we have an active seminar series with a great lineup of leading scholars from all over the world. And also we run reading groups that target early career researchers. And sometimes we invite the authors of particular publication just to join us and share their experience. So that's pretty much all about the GNARC. And in the future, we are planning on organizing more activities. And if you have any questions and if you want to discuss collaborations, please get in touch with me. And if you want to contribute to our reading groups, please get in touch with Jingwen. Okay, so thank you very much. Okay, now please allow me to introduce Dr. Bo Hu. We always save the best for last. Okay, can you share your screen, please? Dr. Bo Hu is a research fellow in Care Policy and Evaluation Center at the LSE.
Hello. Could you please mute yourself?
Mute yourself, yeah.
Okay, I sent him a message.
Gio, can you mute them? Like,
I think
okay, I think it's fine now.
I mute him, yes.
Yeah, really sorry. Dr. Bo, who is a research fellow in Care Policy and Evaluation Center at the LSE. He holds a PhD economics at Nankai University, China, which is one of the elite university in China, and also a PhD in social policy in LSE. His research interest includes determinants and outcomes of long-term care utilization, long-term care financing, and care inequality for older people with dementia. Well, today he's going to talk about childhood adversities and unmet needs of older Chinese adults, the mediation effects of family relationships. And Bo is going to talk about 20 to 30 minutes, and we have time for questions and comments. And you can type your questions in the chat, and also you can ask questions after the presentation. Okay, Bo, now the floor is yours.
Yes, sure. Let me just share my slide. Share screen. I think this is the one. Let me just convert it to. Can you guys see the slide here? Okay, great. All right. Hello, everyone. And first of all, thank you very much, Nan, for organizing the GNARC network. And I feel deeply honored to receive this invitation, and deeply honored to be the first one to contribute to this series. And also thank you for the introduction. Okay, so let me just get straight to the presentation. And this study, as Nan introduced, looks at the relationship between childhood adversities and unmet care needs in older age. And this study is part of my ongoing effort to understand the social determinants of unmet long-term care needs in the older population. We all know that global population aging is a global phenomenon. Older people are intensive users and a main client group of long-term care services. So we expect that in the following decades, demand for long-term care will increase considerably. In this context, it is, I think it is really important that we make sure that there's sufficient care and adequate care for older people. This is not only important for their quality of life, but also is directly relevant to social justice in society. So that's the first motivation of this study. And the second one is the fact that aging is not confined to 1 or 2 life stages. Actually, there's an increasing recognition that aging spans the entire life, and an increasing number of research have shown that exposure to events and experience in early childhood have profound consequences in health and various dimensions of life. And here, one dimension I want to highlight is that, for example, in service and care utilization, all those factors related to this, for example, support-seeking behavior and older people's coping strategy and their preference for long-term care services and the formation of care networks, they can all be shaped by events and experience throughout the life course. Given these 2 motivations, this study has 2 research objectives. The first one is to look at the relationship between childhood adversities and unmet long-term care needs in the older population in China. And the second is to have a better understanding of the pathways through which quality of family relationships mediates this association. And this study builds upon 2 bodies of literature. The first one relates to the contemporary predictors of unmet care needs. Numerous excellent studies have looked at this issue and have identified in different countries the predisposing need and the socioeconomic factors associated with unmet care needs in older age. There are also studies, actually, in different countries. I think there's a general consensus in different countries that availability of care network is an important factor. And the indicators used in previous research include marital status and the living arrangements. Often there's evidence that single older people living alone are significantly more likely to have unmet long-term care needs. And there are also studies which points out that it is not only the availability, but also the quality of care networks that matters. Some studies, for example, argue that closer family bonds means that adult children are more willing or more likely to provide long-term care to their older parents, which implies a reduction in the likelihood of unmet care needs. The second body of literature relates to the relationship between childhood adversities and the social relationships in adulthood. And this body of literature usually is anchored to the attachment theory. And the secure attachment, and they recognize that the secure attachment is an important issue in people's social functioning and the social relationships. And here, secure attachment means being comfortable with intimacy, dependency, and reciprocity in social relationships. Empirical studies have found that exposure to childhood adversities usually is followed by poor social relationships in adulthood. For example, a higher likelihood of divorce, of getting separated, or reporting high level of family stress, or in other cases, people may find it difficult to maintain and stay in a good relationship with friends. These are all the negative outcomes in terms of social functioning and the social relationships. And the interpretations usually builds upon the attachment theory with the argument that childhood adversities compromise the development of secure attachment. Actually, there's a typology of insecure attachment in the literature, which includes preoccupied style, avoidant style, and the dismissive style. And the preoccupied style means that people are always anxious about the social relationships. And avoidant and fearful style is the situation where people are reluctant to seek help because they fear rejection. And the dismissive styles describe the situation where people prefer to cope with stressful situations on their own rather than seeking help from others, because they don't think support or help from others will be that useful. Combining these two bodies of literature, this study has two hypotheses. The first one is that we hypothesize older people experiencing more adversities in childhood are more likely to have unmet long-term care needs. And the second, we hypothesize that this association is mediated by older people's poor relationships with key family members. Here, it mainly refers to spouse and children, who are the main caregivers, usually the main caregivers of older people with long-term care needs. This study used data from CHAOS, a national survey collecting representative with a representative sample of older people aged 80 and over. And our analysis focused on around 2,000 older people with long-term care needs. There are several groups of key variables of interest here. The first one is the ADL, activities of daily living, and IADL, instrumental activities of daily living. And these two types of care needs. And if a person is reported to have difficulty or in performing any ADL or IADL tasks, and then we identify this person as having ADL and IADL care respectively. So these are analyzed separately. If a person reported having an ADL or IADL care needs, but did not receive any help, then we identify this person as having an unmet need with regard to this task. Again, we analyze this ADL and IADL care needs separately. We look at 16 types of childhood adversities in the child's life history survey, including, for example, parental death, lack of affection, childhood neglect, and poverty, drug abuse, and exposure to criminal offense and alcohol abuse, and so on and so forth. Lastly, we look at the relationships, older people's relationships with the spouse and the children. Respondents were asked to rate their relationships with spouse and children on a 5-point scale. So they can answer that totally satisfied, somewhat satisfied, somewhat unsatisfied, or totally unsatisfied with a relationship with the spouse and the children respectively. So these are two variables. We look at them separately. We accounted for a number of control variables that usually appear in previous studies. Those are all of them are pre-contemporary predictors. For example, the demographic factors, socioeconomic factors, and need factors, and so on. In terms of the statistical analysis, there are 3 components here. The first one, we look at the association between childhood adversities and the unmet care needs. This is to look at the total effect of childhood adversities on unmet needs. And the second, we unpack this total effect and look at the conducted path analysis. We first look at the association between childhood adversities and the poor relationships. And then we look at the association between poor relationships and unmet care needs. And then the last part is to decompose the total effects into direct and indirect effects. This table here shows the results of the total effects. If we look at the first row here, it shows that childhood adversity variable is statistically significant, meaning that a higher number of childhood adversities is associated with a higher likelihood of unmet ADL or IADL care needs in older age. It can be noted that even after we control for the contemporary predictors, this variable is still significant. And this graph simply visualizes the relationship between childhood adversities and unmet needs. For example, we can see here for older people reporting having no childhood adversities, their probability of having unmet ADL care needs is about 0.33. But if we look at older people with more than 5 childhood adversities, the probability rises to about 0.53. So clearly there's a big jump when people experience multiple childhood adversities. And this table here shows the results of the path analysis. Remember that I mentioned that we have 2 outcome variables, that is unmet ADL care needs and unmet IADL care needs. And we have 2 mediators, relationship with the spouse and relationship with the children. So there are a total of 4 combinations, meaning 4 groups of mediation models. Let's look at the first one. We found that people with multiple childhood adversities have poorer relationship with a spouse. And further, we found that people with a poorer relationship with a spouse is more likely to have unmet ADL care needs. Then if we look at unmet IADL care needs, again, here we see that childhood adversities is associated with relationship with a spouse. But poor relationship with a spouse, the association between relationship with the spouse and unmet IADL care needs is not statistically significant. So there's a difference here. If we look at relationship with children here, we found more childhood adversities are associated with a poorer relationship with the children, but the association between relationship with children and unmet ADL care needs is not significant. Here we see that childhood adversity are associated with relationship with children, and the poorer relationships with the children is statistically a significant predictor of unmet IADL care needs. Again, we see a difference depending on the type of unmet needs here. And this table here shows the indirect effects of relationship with the spouse and the children, which we think mediates the relationship between childhood adversities and unmet care needs. Our models are nonlinear models. They are either binary logistic or ordinal logistic regression models. So there's a complication of how to decompose the total effects here. Various approaches have been proposed over the years, and this study looked at 3 approaches. And the main purpose of doing so is because this is issue with some technical complication. We just want to look at different methods and make sure that this effect is indeed there. And we look at this issue from different angles, meaning using different approaches. And we found that overall, the pattern of a mediation confirms what we see in the previous table. Okay, if you look at here, for example, the second approach, KHB method, what we found is that relationship with a spouse is an important mediator, is an important factor mediating the relationship between childhood adversity and unmet ADL care needs. But it is not a significant mediator mediating childhood adversity and unmet IADL care needs. If we look at relationships with the children, it's not an important factor for the relationship between childhood adversity and unmet ADL care needs. but important one for childhood adversity and unmet ideal care needs. So again, we see this difference here. If we look at the linear probability models, the numbers calculated are different, but the results are the same. The same pattern emerges. Also, another thing we did is we calculated the proportion of indirect effects. We found that for those important mediators, indirect effects accounted for 12% to 18% of the total effects, which means that that there's still a lot direct effects between childhood adversities and unmet care needs. Okay, so summary of the research findings. We found evidence that childhood adversities are significantly associated with unmet care needs. In older age, the interpretation is that the causes of unmet care needs can be traced back to experience in childhood. Actually, another point I want to add here is that there's an increasing number of studies which look at the health outcomes of childhood adversities. And this study contributes to the existing literature by showing that it not only have profound consequences on health dimension, but also on other dimensions, in particular care utilization. Remember that our sample are confined to those with ADL care needs. That is, compared to other older people, they are somewhat in a disadvantaged group. That is, within this disadvantaged group, this effect of childhood adversities is still playing an important role in terms of their unmet care needs. The second finding is that we found the family relationship is a mediator, but we also found that the mediation effects depends on which family members, which type of unmet care needs we are talking about. And our interpretation is that we see these differences, that is, unmet ADL care needs responds to relationship with the spouse, and unmet IADL care needs respond to relationship with children. We think the reason is there's usually a division of labor when family members providing care services, and this is something the task-specific theory has talked a lot about. That is, different carers providing different care depending on the nature of that task. And in the Chinese context, we think it is because usually for ADL care task and the personal care task, for married older people, it is usually spouse providing care. They are the main carer. So unmet ADL care needs are particularly sensitive to relationship with the spouse. And for children, they are usually, or more often, they are the main caregiver of IADL care tasks. So unmet IADL care needs are often more sensitive to relationships with children. That's our explanation or interpretation of these results. And then finally, we think that the relationships with the spouse and the children are unlikely the only important mediators, because we see there's still a lot of direct effects. Possible other mediators may include, for example, relationships with other family members. For example, for people with high level of care needs, usually there are several family members apart from spouse and the children providing care. And at this stage, other family members may play an important role in terms of whether older people can receive sufficient care. And also, we think there might be other pathways. We hypothesize that childhood adversities compromise the development of attachment, and these in turn may have consequences for older people's coping strategies when they have care needs. For example, older people may totally satisfied or happy with the relationship with family members, but they are reluctant to seek support. Either they think that they prefer they cope with care needs on their own, or they fear rejection from family members. This might be alternative pathways that explain the relationship between childhood adversities and unmet care needs. And finally, the limitation of this study. I think there are two. The first one is we are using retrospective data. So the selection bias is obviously an issue here. And the second one is obviously, especially for the relationship between a relationship with the family members and unmet needs, and that there's reverse causality here. For example, people with unmet care needs, experiencing unmet care needs, may spoil their relationship with family members. So I think in this study, we didn't have additional capacity to look at this issue, but I do think that it is useful in the future analysis to disentangle the causal mechanism, especially to look at whether there's a reciprocal relationship between unmet care needs and the family relationships, especially if we have a large sample size. Remember that in this study, for example, for older people with ADL care needs, only have about 500 people. So the sample size is not large. If we want to look at the relationship between these two variables, I think it is important. First, we have longitudinal data, and the second, we have multiple waves. So the sample size is larger, so that we can have a thorough and a deeper understanding of the causal relationships here. Okay, so that's my presentation today. Thank you for listening.
Okay. Sorry. Okay, thank you so much, Bo. That's really fantastic. So I'm going to stop recording. Yep.
Stop share. Okay.
Yep. Sure. Yes.